Welcome to Your College-Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good evening, friends. I thought I was going to come to you from Elizabethtown, Kentucky, which is where I was this morning, but I had tech issues. So now I'm coming to you Sunday evening, which I never do. And you're wondering, what are you doing there? Well, I'm on 1 week of college visits, then 1 week family reunion in Colorado, then another week of college visits. So today I'm spending 4 days with my brother from another mother. Dave's got me hooked up in the penthouse suite at his place. And tomorrow, Dave and I will visit Northwestern in the morning, Loyola in the afternoon. Tuesday, we're at U Chicago. Wednesday, he has to work, but I'll visit University of Illinois at Chicago and DePaul. Now, will you get spotlights? Well, we've already done spotlights on all 5 of these. So, you know, if you're brand new, you can just go to yourcollege-bound-kid.com, click spotlights, and you can hear the entire spotlight there without having a part 1 or a part 2. I might do a brief visit report if something really grabs me, but I still haven't done spotlights from my trip to the Pacific Northwest in March. That was 7 schools, or my trip to Tennessee in June. That was 10 schools. And we've been giving you a steady dose of North Carolina lately, but we want to make sure that we consciously don't neglect other regions of the country. So in today's episode, I want to answer a question that 2 people sent in that basically said, there's a lot of talk about how affirmative action will impact Black and Latinos, but how's it going to impact Asians? I also want to elaborate on something I said in last week's 41-minute soliloquy on affirmative action. And another edition of Grinding My Gears. Some of you love those. You'll get one again 2 weeks in a row. And then we'll have the final part of Lisa and Susan's discussion about advice for students with special needs. And the final part of Lisa's interview with Dr. Irena Smith about her book, The Golden Ticket, A Life in College Admissions. Okay, let's dive in with the question about how affirmative action will impact Asians. There's a perception that so many more Asians are going to be admitted now that race-based affirmative action has been all but outlawed. And last week, I said that just like there was intentionality to keep Jews out, and powerful forces are at work to keep certain, especially the most exclusive private schools, primarily geared toward those who they were originally intended for, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Now, here's some nuance to that. The Asian population is one of the fastest growing populations in this country. So I do expect to see some growth in the Asian percentage. It is also a highly educated population. And a lot of the people that are getting visas are often some of the most educated people in the country. It has been said the top 1% are often coming over here. Doctors, specialist doctors, high-level engineers, computer scientists. These families value education, and the most underrated component of how strong a student will be academically is how educated are their parents. So I'm in Dave's pad, so I'm going to use him as an example. Dave went to Princeton and Harvard, and he also has an advanced degree from Northwestern. He's married to a physician who also is a Northwestern graduate. So Dave's daughter, Lauren, was really set up for success. She's a great kid. She worked hard. I started working with her in the 7th grade. In a lot of ways, very similar to a lot of Asian families. They have kids who value education. They work really hard. They test like rocket scientists, and they'll have a lot of success in college admissions. But there's a principle. It's an axiom. It's like the law of gravity. And if you're a regular listener, you've heard me say this. Colleges want what they do not have, especially at the most selective school. They ask themselves, who is not around the table? What voice is not here that could strengthen our student body, could broaden the perspectives of our students in the dining rooms, in the dorms, in the playing fields. They don't just look at students and say, you're Asian. That's what a lot of people think. They oftentimes will say, which students amongst our Asian populations are underrepresented and overrepresented. And at a lot of the most selective schools, Chinese students and Indian American students and Korean American students tend to be, some of them are overrepresented Asian Americans. And some of the underrepresented Asian Americans are Burmese, Asian students from Hmong, from Vietnam, Laotians, Cambodians, and Native Hawaiians. And so this might bust the myth of their model minority. Over 40% of Asian American undergrads attend community colleges, not elite, highly selective four-year institutions. Now, large swaths of Asian students are not coming from highly educated and affluent parents, who the colleges are looking to identify. In fact, in the Los Angeles school system, they use a rather unwieldy acronym. Get ready, it's really long. AANHPIAMEMSA. What does that stand for? Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian. They do this to describe the diversity of the subpopulations of Asian and Pacific Islanders, recognizing that there's a lot of complexity within the Asian American community. And colleges are looking for that complexity. Once again, they're looking for what they don't have. So they'll be looking for Indian Americans, they'll be looking for Chinese Americans and Korean Americans and Japanese Americans and Filipino Americans who are first gen, who don't come from wealth. And they will recognize the concept of their distance traveled. So expect Asian numbers to grow, mostly because it's a growing population. It's an overall higher percentage of wealth and college-educated parents, hardworking, talented students, oftentimes attending elite schools, and they highly prize attending elite colleges within the culture, and they're willing to make the requisite sacrifice. But the numbers are already high at some of the elite schools. The UC's over 35% for most of them, and many other of your tech powers like your MITs, Rice, Carnegie Mellons, between 25 and 30%, and most other of your most selective 25 schools over 20%, which is impressive given the fact that Asian Americans are about 6% of the population. However, I do not foresee them exceeding 50% at private schools with this recent change. Now, I want to elaborate on something I said last week and add a little nuance and context. So I had a section last week on affirmative action where I said, what do I think is going to happen? And I basically said I see three main scenarios. And I'll just repeat this in case either you forgot or you never heard it. So scenario one are people that's kind of status quo. It's almost like yawn the decision, either because they were already, had referendums in their state and they were not taking race into account in college admissions. And you've probably heard me say a couple times 9 states had prohibited affirmative action. A couple times I said 10. I forgot when Idaho became the most recent state that was the 9th. So it might be confusing. I know I've said 9 states and then a couple times I said 10, but it's actually 9. So you might have been one of the 9 states that already wasn't practicing affirmative action. There was also a number of other schools that voluntarily were not practicing race-based affirmative action, either because they didn't believe in it or it wasn't politically tenable or they'd been threatened from a lawsuit. So there's already a large group that for them, it really wasn't going to make a difference. And we're talking about some big states, California, Michigan, Florida, Texas. These are some of the biggest states in the country. They already were not practicing race-based affirmative action in their public school system. Now, of course, the privates are going to have to comply as well, the Pomonas and the Rices, and the Dukes. And so, it's a little different. I'm not going to say there's no change, but obviously most students attend public school. So there's that group that really not much has changed. And there's another group that really this issue's just not really their jam, depending on, the location of the state that they may be or the state that they may be in and what the voices of their constituency think. Then I talked about the second group, and I said this second group, they're going to be deeply hurt by this, but they're going to be petrified by lawsuits suits and paralyzed to do anything that may be bold in the way of diversity. And then I said the third group, I envision they're going to see that caveat that individual race considerations could be taken into consideration, and they're going to be probably a little more clandestine. They're going to be so committed to their diversity mission, and they're probably going to do something like let their admission officers see the statement with the caveat and then say, we will not have any discussions around the table at all. I want you to act like Ed Bloom is here with his tape recorder, okay, ready to file a lawsuit. Now, I think for some, the way in which I communicated that, I might have implied that the group you really want to be in is the last group. And the middle group, it's nice that they have these intentions, but they lack courage. But that is not how I feel. I actually feel like the middle group is really the more astute and prudent place to be for the next couple years at least, to see how things flesh out. And that's taken from somebody who pushed the envelope when I was in admissions and someone who passionately believes in the value of diversity. So you say, well, why are you saying that? It sounds like you're copping out. Well, I say it because of the inevitable backlash. Stephen Miller, the white nationalist who was Trump's advisor during his presidency, who's now the president of the American First Legal Association, said on Friday his nonprofit organization sent a letter to the deans of 200 law schools across the country warning of future legal action if they do not heed the court's ruling. So here's an exact quote from the letter that Miller's organization sent to 200 law schools. Here's what it says. Today, we sent a warning letter to the deans of 200 law schools around America, telling them they must obey the Supreme Court ruling striking down illegal racial discrimination and affirmative action. Miller said in a video posted on Twitter, quote again, if they try to violate, circumvent, or bypass, subvert, or otherwise program around that ruling, we're going to take them to court. We're going to hold them to account. So that's the backlash that's inevitable. One other thing. Miller's organization said in a press release that its letters demand the schools immediately end practices that are in violation of the Supreme Court ruling. In a letter to John Manning, dean of Harvard's law school, Miller wrote that he was warning him of the consequences that you and your institution will face if you fail to comply with or attempt to circumvent the court's ruling. There are those within and outside your institutions who will tell you that you can develop an admission scheme through pretext or proxy to achieve same discriminatory outcome, the letter reads. Anyone telling you such a thing is coaching you to engage in illegal conduct in brazen violation of a Supreme Court ruling, law breaking which you will be fully complicit and thus fully liable. So that's just the inevitable reality. So I actually think the second place is the safest one to be. I think schools that are putting out these diversity commitment statements, and I probably have 15 in my email box, I think it's really dangerous. I've been listening to some of the legal experts since last week who are actually advising some of the Ivy League schools. And they're saying things like, you can be sued for having an intent of more racial diversity because the Supreme Court rejected, going back to Grutter and even Bard-Mackie, they rejected the diversity as a value, saying it's not measurable and therefore it's not something that you can pursue as a goal. They said individual circumstances can be taken into consideration, but things like having boxes anymore, that's highly unadvisable. Race-based boxes. Even reporting your numbers out for a school, that can be seen as having a goal of racial diversity. And basically the Supreme Court rejected that. Now, so far, they have not rejected pipeline programs, feeder programs like Posse and Questbridge and things like that. They haven't technically rejected affinity groups, race-based affinity groups, when people get to the school to provide support. They didn't rule on that. They haven't even ruled on race-based scholarships, but it's really most likely on very tenuous ground. And so why do I say that second position is a safe space? Well, here's another reason. On Thursday, the Republican Speaker of the Wisconsin State Assembly suggested he'll move to ban grants designated for minority undergraduate students. The Speaker, Robin Voss, responded to a tweet claiming a minority scholarship program designated for students who are Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, now check this out, or Laotian, Vietnamese, or Cambodian. amounted to discrimination. I thought you were so concerned about Asian students for fair admissions. I thought you cared so much about Asian discrimination. Once again, exploiting the Asians and now going after a scholarship that could benefit under-resourced and less educated Asians. Notice he specifically said Blacks, Latinos, and Cambodians, Laotian, and Vietnamese. So there you go. That's the context in which schools function. And I just want to clarify, I actually think it's safe to be in the second place for at least for the first couple years to see how things play out. And no more statements about your diversity goals, no box checking, no reporting your racial diversity numbers. The Supreme Court has rejected the value of diversity as something that a school has a vested interest in and can pursue. Now, having said that, huge shout out to Ketanji Brown Jackson. Huge shout out. Another thing I learned this week is that the Supreme Court was likely to be even more radical. But in their oral arguments, Ketanji Brown Jackson presented such a compelling case when she said, is it permissible for a student 5th, 6th, 7th generation legacy to talk about their legacy in their application? And everybody agreed, yeah, they can talk about their legacy if they want. So then she said, so let me get this straight. A student can talk about their legacy, but another student is not permitted to talk about how the historic legacy prevented them from even attending the school. So remember, these schools didn't start diversifying in any significant way into the 60s. That's why you had the HBCUs. And that argument was so compelling, and there was no rebuttal for that. A lot of people think that this individual carve-out only happened because of the compelling nature of Ketanji Brown Jackson's argument. Okay, so let me transition to what's grinding my gears. And this may surprise people. As soon as the statement came out from the Supreme Court, immediately 3 minority advocacy groups are suing Harvard's governing body, accusing the school of discrimination by giving preferential treatment to the children of wealthy donors and alumni. And they're citing the recent Supreme Court ruling that gutted affirmative action to bolster their lawsuit. The lawsuit is being filed by Lawyers for Civil Rights Group on behalf of the Chica Project, an African community economic development of New England, and the Greater Boston Latino Network. It alleges the students who receive preferential treatment are overwhelmingly white and make up as much as 15% of admitted students. Here's a quote. This preferential treatment has nothing to do with an applicant's merit. Instead, it is unfair and unearned benefit that is conferred solely based on a family that the applicant is born into. The custom, pattern, and practice is exclusionary and discriminatory. It severely advantages and harms applicants of color. Now, I know a lot of people may be thinking, well, aren't you supportive of that? Isn't that going to create more fairness? If they're going to go after race-based affirmative action, then shouldn't they also go after donors and go after legacy? So here's what's grinding my gears. Supreme Court, butt out. Mind your own business. You know, I say to my students when I'm working with them on essays, especially when their essays are a little disjointed, I say, do you drive a car? Most of them say yes. I say, you know how important it is to stay in your lane and not zigzag all over the place? And they get it. I say, that's what I want you to do with your essay. Stay in your lane, stay on the same thought pattern, and develop it throughout your whole essay. I'm saying that the Supreme Court, you're grinding my gears. You're not the executive branch. You're not the legislative branch. And I don't think it was ever intended for you guys to have these lifetime appointments. I mean, Clarence Thomas has already been around for 6 presidents. Who knows how many he'll be around before he moves on. And now you're moving into areas you have no business moving into. And instead of me celebrating other attempts to, if you're going to go after this form of preference, then you should also go after these forms of preference. My view is Supreme Court, get out of the business. You're not educators, okay? I don't walk into a certified master technician mechanic and start telling them what to do because they know that car, I don't. And I'm offended that the Supreme Court thinks they can just move into areas where they have no expertise. I mean, the lower courts, if you would have seen how many experts came and presented their research of why diversity has a compelling interest and 10 different ways in which it helps colleges. And they won that ruling. And then they won the appeal. But the arrogance to step out of their lane and to control American life, I find nauseous. And instead of me celebrating other attempts to level the playing field, I find myself offended that they may start going into other realms and dictating American life. Now, that does not mean I don't celebrate it if a school makes a decision like an Amherst or Pomona or MIT or Caltech or Johns Hopkins to, voluntarily to get rid of legacy admission. But let the school manage their own process. Like Bollinger said, not only is it the end of the civil rights era, it's the end of schools being trusted as experts to manage their own admissions decisions. So that's what's grinding my gears. All right, as we transition, Lisa and Susan had a great discussion, and you heard the first half 2 weeks ago, and then I broke to talk more about affirmative action. And so now we're going into part 2. So we're going to play a minute or so of what you've already heard just to get some context to jog your mind. But it's a really, really important conversation about, if you've got special needs student, what do you look for when you're looking at colleges? And so it's time for part 2. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Hi, my name is Mary. I'm a listener from Albany, New York. I thought it would be very interesting if you could do a podcast that discusses children with special needs. I have a nephew that has ADHD. He's applying to colleges. He's a rising senior in high school. And it would be interesting to know what a child could do when they're applying to colleges to get across, what their difficulties may have been in high school with their disability. And the other thing I would ask is, can you maybe discuss if colleges have programs for children that have special needs, such as, special academic services, or, do they make accommodations for them, such as taking on-time tests or, taking tests by themselves, that kind of thing. That would be great. Thank you so much.
After helping kids for so many years with this application and transition to college, when my own kids got into that, I was really surprised that their 2 universities basically said, whatever. They took the testing from high school, even though I thought, for sure we're going to have to re-up this testing, because it was from 9th and 10th grade. No adult norms. It was done on, child norms. And I thought, okay, we're going to get to college, and at least maybe they'll get in, and then they'll be told they have to update. And they never were for all 4 years of college. But I think kids and parents need to ask that question up front. Is what psych ed testing do you need? I have testing, I have an IEP or an academic plan of support. Here are the dates. Are we up to date? And this is all done with the services office, the student services office, not admissions.
Yeah.
And you can do it as an applicant or when you're researching, or you can do it after you've been admitted. In fact, you should probably do it both times.
Yeah. And I know some of the specialized programs, they'll require additional testing. Like a lot of them required an IQ test. They wanted someone to have an IQ of at least 90 or above, because they felt like that was what was needed to be successful in their program. So, and everyone is different. So unfortunately, it's going to require Mary's family to do some research and get into the weeds, as Mark says, with all of those different requirements.
Well, the good news is the colleges are going to want to work, with Mary's nephew and his family. They're accustomed to this. And as soon as, if he's going into his senior year now, if he's visiting colleges, once he uses some guidebooks and some websites, and I have a few others that I think are really, really helpful. Once he's got his list underway, then making a phone call, making an appointment to talk with the student services office, and just say, hey, I'm a rising senior, and maybe her nephew's parents or Mary herself can help him develop a list of questions and an outline, right? So he doesn't feel bereft of support there. It's very courageous for a teenager to take responsibility for this level of research, and he may need to ease into it. I know I've worked with a lot of students at my school where they actually sat in my office with me and we did a call together to get the ball rolling. And we found out from a college, is this a good time to talk about this and to review the students' testing and appropriateness for your level of support? And they would be so ready to engage. They were so grateful that a student and a family were doing this proactively. And this is what they do. Every college has wonderful stories about highly successful students. And my daughter became one of those at her university because she had a hard time in high school. She had to work very, very hard. The ADD was very challenging for her to figure out. And I don't think our college prep school did the best possible job, but we did okay. She got through. She was proud of herself, and she got to a university that welcomed her into a program with a lot of positivity and a schedule, which she needed very much. She needed to know that for her first year, she needed to have a monthly sit-down meeting with a disability counselor. And that woman became a cheerleader for her, because my daughter's skill set going to college really included self-advocacy. She had learned that in high school, and when the student services person said, you need to connect with each, we're not going to tell your professors very much. You're going to be on a list that you've enrolled in their class, but then you are going to proactively be in the classroom, and you are not going to wait until you are having problems. And that is probably the best piece of advice I can give to Mary's nephew.
Anyone.
Get it set up ahead of time. There's no shame. This is like, anybody advocating for themselves, which is, of course, Lisa, as we know, one of the great life skills of the universe.
I know. But I feel like I have noticed lately that more and more schools are being more inviting and inclusive in this process, and they want to provide support if it's needed. I went to a counselor day at East Carolina University last week, which I'll talk about, sometime on the podcast, but they have this great support department, and they are out there looking for kids. They're asking people to flag kids. And they're like, if you get that kid in the door, if we can just get them in the door, we will make sure they are okay. And they will give them executive functioning, coaching, tutoring, what kind of accommodations do you need? And I see more and more of that from colleges. Connecticut College, I attended an online webinar, and the head of their support services says that he knows all the students because it's small. And if someone says they're not getting any services, he's like, well, why not? Surely we must be able to do something to help you. And it's just wonderful. More of a welcoming attitude, which I think is high time in coming. Because all of us probably could use a little brushing up on our executive functioning skills. And,
oh my gosh, you're not kidding.
Get needed cheerleader. So I think that's great. But it does, not every school is at that point. And that's where the research and the interviewing and the talking come into play.
That's right. And kids can't wait for their professors to identify them. I mean, professors at some schools, especially in the first year, are aware of kids, but they often don't know them deeply as individuals. It's a different style. Some colleges, smaller colleges that have smaller classes, of course, are more likely to do that. But they're not likely to pull a student aside and say, do you have a learning disability? Or that they're likely to at the midterm, when the first grading period comes out.
Would you like to talk about this? Is there anything I can help you with? Yeah.
But my daughter's experience, which totally shocked her, and this was at a university of probably about 7,000 public university of about 7,000 people, so it wasn't intimate.
Mm-hmm.
But when she walked into her professor's offices to say, so here are the accommodations I've used that have really helped me in high school, they were like, sure, just come pick up the exam. I'll keep it in an envelope for you. Go to the library, and when you're done, it would have you write your start time, write your stop time, turn it into a librarian. And one of her funniest stories was one of her first big written exams. By the time she went to the desk to turn it in, the staff was all gone. There were only student people behind the desk. And they said, we're not taking nothing from you. So figures, well, I'll just go somewhere else and turn it in. So she's walking around campus. She's a first semester student, right? She's walking around campus with this exam in her brown envelope. And she calls me, and she was not one to advocate with me at all. I was one of those. So she calls and she goes, any suggestions? Like, should I leave it at Starbucks? Or I can take it to my dorm room, right? The professor won't believe that I finished it with my time and a half, right? So I said, well, go back to the library and find out where the professor's office is. And of course she goes and it's locked and she puts it under the door.
Right. That means that's the solution.
So, triumphant, problem solving. And her other wonderful story, and I think Mary will probably appreciate this if she's listening, is she was memorizing vast amounts of material for an ADD kid is very hard, especially in the sciences where the vocabulary has Latin roots and you've never studied Latin and there's no context for the memorization, right? So she's memorizing geology stuff for an exam, and she goes into the professor and she goes, I think I can memorize about a quarter of this for the exam. She goes, my brain is just not going to hold the rest of it, but I really like this. She actually loved the class. Said, well, then you'll take the exam in 2 halves. You'll be able to prepare for it. So that wasn't an accommodation anyone had written down for her. The professor was reasonable. She wanted to show what she knew. And that, of course, is the basis for accommodations, is helping the students show what they know. And he said, now we're going to sit down and I'm going to show you a trick one of my previous students taught me. And he, believe it or not, Lisa, he taught her songs.
Oh, that's how my daughter learns everything. She has ADD. We may have made up so many songs in our day.
Unbelievable. But for a PhD in geology, it was a real shocker. And so they're singing, the, metamorphic.
The rock cycle.
Rock stuff. And they're singing. She said, here I am sitting in his office in the science building. And the two of us are singing away to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And, it was a real lesson for her that professors, for the most part, really want to help you learn. And if you can be clear, if Mary's nephew can be clear about what's really worked for him, because some of his high school accommodations may not be necessary anymore. For my daughter, she had to test alone because she was a tapper, which was a technique a high school counselor had taught her, where when she was reading, she needed to tap, and it was a focusing technique. And she tapped her way through a lot of long reading passages. And I have no idea why that was helpful, but it clearly was. And when she explained this to professors, they were like, we totally get that. We'll let you go tap all by yourself in my office or someplace else. So, Mary's nephew may have learned some tricks on his own or with the help of a counselor, and being clear as he moves forward. It may not just be 50% extended time, what he got on his SATs, perhaps as an accommodation. But there are a lot of things where professors, now my son's university, which was a very high-powered, smarty pants environment, right? He never found the professors to be terribly sympathetic or empathetic, but the people in the support services office were terrific. And he simply, unlike his twin sister, never really took advantage of anything other than extra time. He kind of wasn't as self-aware, wasn't as ready to empower himself. And he paid a price for that. So Mary's nephew, in a way, being a young man, may need a little more coaching on how to advocate for himself. That's
right. Yeah. That is my big complaint. My pet peeve is that, and part of this is like bitterness. Like I walked up, Phil in the snow both ways to school. But, when I went to school, maybe when you went to school, there was not help. There was no help, and now there's all this help, but kids are afraid to ask for it. And I feel like if you as the people at East Carolina University said, if you can just walk in the door of the office and talk to someone, people are going to help you. People want to help you. That's their job. They get paid to help you. And so it's just getting kids comfortable with the idea of just asking a grown-up every once in a while for help. You will not explode. It will be fine. And especially for men. No, they think more of you.
That's right. Yeah. And, so many more kids now have diagnoses. You and I know that this exploded largely because of the SAT and the ACT and the availability of accommodations for these high stakes tests, which is another reason in my mind why the test optional movement is such a critically positive move for our nation's children. Both kids who have
you and I could talk for hours on that one, but I'm in your camp. But
kids do not have to see these tests any longer, except in a few precious states that feel, they're holding on to them. But it's really a very, very tiny minority they're testing still. And kids can redefine themselves as learners in the absence of those, and their chances, so to speak. They see themselves as more viable applicants for a wider range of colleges. But still, I think the college search process, as the Mary Beth Kravitz book points out, it's all about fit and setting yourself up for success,
right?
Giving yourself time to grow.
Well, that's it. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted, before I forget, the other website that Mary's nephew's family will probably benefit from, because I find it really walks parents through, gives them the right paradigm for thinking about a learning disability and college, is understood.org.
Oh, yeah. Understood.org is great.
Yeah, you know it, Lisa. And there's an article called 7 Things to Know About College Disability Services. It walks people through the difference between the IDEA and the Americans with Disabilities Act, the responsibility of the family and the young person to make sure they understand what the requirements are for getting services on the college level, what you have to do before you matriculate. Right? Things are kind of in order. What describes support, the fact that you probably will not have a case manager or a social worker in the same way that some students have had if they have been classified as special ed or other kinds of accommodations. And then what reasonable accommodations look like in college, which is a little bit, a little bit different, especially for things like for learning disabilities as opposed to physical or medical conditions.
Yeah.
But it's an important piece for families to see early on.
No, that's really great. And I think, I don't think the KW guide that Mary Kravitz wrote is online. I had to
Oh,
buy a paper copy recently, but it's on Amazon and I use that book all the time and highly recommend it
and it's
to
K&W,
Mary.
right?
Yeah, KW, to Mary and her family. And we just wish, Mary, wish your kids and your nephew all the best of luck. And please let us know how it all turns out.
Absolutely, Mary. Best wishes, and let us know how it goes.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
And friends, it's now time for the final part of Lisa interviewing Irena Smith about her book, The Golden Ticket, A Life and Admissions Essays. And so, fascinating conversation, and we hope you enjoy this final part of that interview as well.
Yeah, so many times I'll have conversations with students, let's say about their schedule, and they'll say to me, I really feel like I need to take AP Lit, but my school has this Gothic literature course that I really want to take, and it's not AP and it's not weighted. What should I do? And I'm going to say, well, take the one that you want. We can't live our lives to please some mythical admissions officer somewhere.
Exactly.
But it's really hard for kids to feel like it's okay to do that.
Right. And I think that it's, the mythical admissions officer who you will never meet, who you don't know, who may or may not care about AP Lit, but taking the Gothic literature class may give you some amazing essay topics, or it may send you down a rabbit hole of researching, what even is that? Is it related to vampires? How did those come about? And just kind of finding interesting places where your curiosity takes you that may or may not have an AP next to it. And this is the other thing I think that has changed so drastically since the time that I was in high school. My high school, granted, this was about 1,000 years ago, but I think we had a total of 4 AP classes that were offered. Schools now offer routinely 10 or more, and students feel like they have to take all of them, because if the school offers 10 or 15 APs and you only take 7, then you're slacking. I mean, there are other people who are taking all 15 and then probably more online. And the fact is, you still have college to take 4 more years of classes. And if you really love that subject, you have graduate school potentially. So this feeling that adulthood or young adulthood has to get crammed into an increasingly small envelope is, I think, another really damaging thing, because students are feeling like they have to do it rather than they want to or they're curious about it.
Yeah. And it's so much of the literature that you read online about your college essays. Be authentic. But it's like a curated authenticity. It's not actual authenticity.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that if students were actually authentic, if they were able to say true things about their life, it would probably not read great on a college application. And this is a whole other topic that probably, or certainly, books should be written about. This idea that so many students I've worked with and so many students I know have struggled with mental health issues, that they cannot or feel like they cannot write about. And I think in many ways, unfortunately, they're right, because admissions officers do tend to be risk averse. And even though in an ideal world, it would be great if a student could disclose that they had a bout with depression, they came out on the other side, these are the coping mechanisms that they've learned. And for colleges to realize, oh, this is somebody who has faced a lot of adversity, and now they're equipped with the tools to thrive in college. But it's still, I think, not entirely in the clear to be able to do that and not expect for a college to be like, oh, we have a fragile student, as opposed to admitting somebody who may be much more fragile, but who decided not to talk about it.
Exactly. What advice do you have for students in addition to trying to just do things that they're interested in?
So I am a big reader and always have been. And my favorite piece of advice that fewer students, I think, are taking anymore, sadly, is to read everything you can get your hands on. And if you don't like reading, listen to audiobooks, because there are some really, really amazing narrators and productions, and sometimes with an entire cast. And this is a detour, but there's a great book called The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton, which has a cast, I think, of at least 10 people. It's a fictional oral oral history documentary of a fictional Afro-punk band in the 1970s. It's so good. And even if you're not a reader, listening to it is an absolutely amazing experience. And I think that reading long form fiction or nonfiction in areas that they're interested in is something that really enriches students in ways that they may not even suspect until they're older. But I've never worked with a student who is a voracious reader who ended up in a terrible place in either college or in life. And just to follow your curiosities. If the curiosities are building things or sewing things or reading books or writing screenplays or your own dog walking service or anything that just brings you joy, that's my best advice. And also get enough sleep.
Yeah, sleep is key. What about parents? What advice do you have for them?
I don't know that I'm in a place to give parenting advice, having made many, many mistakes as a parent.
But see, that's what gives you the right to give parenting advice.
As opposed to saying, here's what you should do. So I think that appreciating your children for who they are and not who you want them to be is really, really important, and doing it every day. And this is a really, really unhappy topic, but again, from personal experience and living in Palo Alto, which has been the site of several suicide clusters of teenagers and also former students who live in Palo Alto, there is usually an outpouring of grief, obviously, and hand-wringing and soul-searching after each public suicide. And we don't even know how many out of the media eye there have been. It's usually very short-lived. And there are usually at least 12 or 13 people who say, hug your children close, which is not wrong. But I think if you're hugging your children close for the one day that you were devastated by this news, and then you go back to, are you doing your homework? Are you going to this meeting? What are your deliverables on this particular thing? That's not really holding them close. I think that holding them close means recognize who they are in this moment and try to be there with them in that moment every day without thinking, why are you not doing these college preparatory things? Why are you not whatever? Because I think that kind of thinking in my own family has done a lot of damage, is why are you not doing these things? And I think flipping that to, what are you doing? What can we find that we have in common that makes us happy? That makes us enjoy each other's company, and that doesn't make me feel like I'm coming to my children with a set of unspoken demands, and whether or not they know those demands, they feel somehow insufficient already because they know that I'm thinking something that they're not doing. And I think letting go of that has been a real process for me, but it's been incredibly useful, I think, to me and to my kids. And so I think just being mindful of how you approach your child. Are you looking at them as a person in the throes of adolescence and academic demands and extracurricular demands and social demands, and just trying to navigate the world, and how hard it can be to navigate the world when you're 14 or 15 or 16, and keeping that in mind without being like, but how are you going to look for college?
Yeah, it's kind of freeing if you can let go of that. It's hard to do. I feel like they're like a really uncomfortable pair of shoes. And when we're not looking, people are shoving our feet back into them.
Exactly.
But if you can keep them off, then all things are possible.
Yeah. And I think it is really hard too, because if you live in a community where everybody else is doing it, you feel like an outlier. You feel like, what is wrong with me that I'm not doing these things? And my daughter actually told me a couple of days ago, her one AP class that she took in high school was AP Psych. And she did really well in it. And she's actually quite interested in psychology. And she said that they were talking one day about student stress. And the AP teacher asked students, about time management and how they're managing stress. And she said, how many of you are in AP classes? As a rhetorical question, because she assumed that everybody was, and she was trying to be helpful in terms of suggesting how they manage their time. And my daughter said literally everybody raised their hand, and she was the one person who hadn't. So she was immediately and put her hand up, because do you really want to be the one person sitting in a class of 30 who's not taking any other APs as a senior?
Right. Yeah, it's just so much pressure. It's just in the water, it feels like, all around. Yeah, I asked my daughter, she's a freshman in high school, and I said, well, are kids stressed at your high school? She said, well, some of them. I said, well, tell me about them. She said, well, I have this friend. She really wants to go to Harvard, so she feels like she has to be perfect at everything. And I said, well, do you feel like that? She's like, I know, I'm not getting into Harvard.
Then you're doing a good job. And honestly, like a ninth grader who wants to go to Harvard, and that's,
Yeah, because how would you know?
Right.
You're still figuring yourself out.
Well, apparently you would, because the other thing that happened, and this is also in the book, and this kills me, is when my oldest son started college at University of the Pacific, which again, great fit for him, great school. My daughter was talking to a friend of hers in, I want to say 7th or 8th grade. She was still in middle school. And the friend said, oh, where does your brother go to college? And she said UOP, which is the abbreviation of University of the Pacific. And the friend said, oh, UPenn? And my daughter, being a savvy 7th or 8th grader, was like, because, why would you correct somebody? Or why would you explain that there's this school that is amazing and actually has the major that my older brother wants, and the fact that he is going there is an absolute miracle in the first place. You don't have the wherewithal as an 11 or 12-year-old to explain that to somebody. So she was like, sure. It's like, did you tell her that he was studying bioengineering too? And she was like, no, we didn't get that far.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah.
It never came to that.
But I had, when I was in 7th and 8th grade, I had no idea what college was, I don't think. I mean, I didn't, I knew that was a thing, but I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between UPenn and UOP.
Of course. Yeah. And, I'm old, but when I went to school, there was no college admissions, like prep or anything like that. I had like a book, I think it was Peterson's, and I applied to some colleges, and I used a typewriter, and I either got in or I didn't. No, I don't even remember meeting with my guidance counselor ever, one time. But it's so different now.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that our school either didn't have a guidance counselor or had somebody who once yelled at me the one time I showed up in the library to look at college admissions books. It's possible that it was because I was there with 2 friends and we were giggling, but she was like, get out of here. And I was like, well, so much for my college search. So... And that was the end of that. But it really, it seemed so much simpler. And I think, the other thing that I have strong opinions about is often parents, especially parents of my age or slightly younger, who want to know why it is so much more difficult today, which it really is. Because their college application experience was obviously very different. And many of them say I would not have gotten into wherever they went to school if I applied today. And my theory is that possibly the 2 worst things that came out of the 1980s, apart from frosted hair and shoulder pads, but that's a whole different thing, was the U.S. News and World Report started college rankings. and Fox News. And, that's probably an unpopular with some listeners political opinion. But if you trace the line between where we are now and what happened in the 1980s, fortunately, shoulder pads and frosted hair are staying put, which I'm really pleased about. And permed hair. I had a perm in the 80s, but we won't talk about that because that's what you did. Anyway, so the idea that you could rank colleges and that there was, a best, I think really transformed college admissions. It wasn't sudden, but it started getting worse and worse the more prevalent the rankings became. And obviously, the more partisan Fox News became, the more we went down that particular path. But I think that, partly it's the proliferation of everybody can put their opinions and ideas on the internet about how to get into a good school. But the U.S. News and World Report, I think, did a lot of damage in putting numbers to, this is the number one school based on these criteria that we sort of made up without really looking at, the best school for whom.
Right. No, absolutely. And it's crazy because my daughter, when she was rushing for her sorority, she would say this group is the highest ranked sorority and this group is the lowest ranked sorority. I'm like, well, how do you rank a group of people? They're all good at different things. Exactly. They all have different strengths. You can't really. It's arbitrary.
But I think it's human nature to want to order things. So it makes sense. Malcolm Gladwell has a really, really great article that aged beautifully from, I want to say 2011 in the New Yorker called The Order of Things, about the sheer idiocy of trying to rank colleges, where he compares it to the car and driver best cars. He's like, you try to do that. That's a stationary, it's not a stationary object when you drive it, but when it's parked, it's a stationary object. And it's hard enough to rank cars, right? Because you have to ask, for what purpose? Are you carrying wood in the wilds of Oregon? Are you driving in New York City? Are you a mom of 3 kids with a minivan who's doing a lot of, pickups and drop-offs? And that's hard enough for a car. Now take a college, which turns over its students every year. One class graduates, one comes in, faculty comes and goes, funding waxes and wanes. The location doesn't change, obviously. The size doesn't usually change. The amenities, get upgraded and colleges put in climbing walls and whatever else. But the fact is that to try to rank something so dynamic and so, I shouldn't say impermanent, but so hard to pin down is really an exercise in folly. And yet people look at it, and of course, everybody wants to be in the top 10 on the U.S. News and World Report. And the fact that there are 2,990 other colleges, most of which are quite good, does not deter people from focusing on the top 10 or the top 15 if they have to.
Oh, my goodness. So what about college counselors? What advice do you have for us?
I think not too dissimilar from the so-called advice I shared with being a parent. I think, meeting people where they are. I've moved from being privately outraged and disbelieving at parents with what I thought were their absurd demands to recognizing that I've probably had more than a fair share of my own absurd parent moments, and just recognizing that you're not going to change anybody's mind. You're not going to convince them that they're wrong in wanting Harvard or that they're a bad parent for subjecting their child to this rigorous regimen or not stepping in and saying, this is not going to be okay. But you can meet them where they are, and you can at least be curious about, where is this coming from? What are they hoping to get, both for students and parents? What are they hoping to get from being admitted to these schools? And the thing that I usually try to do in my own practice is to make sure that a student has a college list that is realistic, where they are going to get into at least some of the schools on their list, because students who sort of snobbily reject, I'm not going to apply there, will usually live to regret not having applied there when they don't get into Caltech, Harvard, MIT, and Stanford and Berkeley, their safety school. So it's, I think, a good idea to look at schools that are achievable and look at them not as consolation prizes, but look at really what do they offer. And I think that in doing that with students have also always discovered, and I love to like do this thing where we kind of screen share and poke around college websites, and all of a sudden we'll discover this thing where, oh, they didn't know that the school had this program. And all of a sudden it doesn't look like a consolation prize. It looks like somewhere where they can really do exactly what they want in a way that they may not be able to do at their highly rejective because everybody applies their school.
Right. No, that's such a great point. To really try to get people focused on what do you want to do and what are the ingredients that can help you get there.
Exactly. Yeah. Where do you want to live even? You know, if your reach school is in the wilds of upstate New York, no offense to Cornell, and you are a profoundly urban person, do you really want to live in Ithaca? I mean, Ithaca is beautiful and gorgeous, as it says in the promotional material. And my husband went to Cornell and had a great time. And I think I would have poked myself in the eye with a sharp stick if I had to go to school there, because it's got a cute little downtown and that's it. And I think I would have needed to be in a bigger city near more things to do. And I think just for students to know that about themselves, where do you see yourself living for the next 4 years? Because that will be as much of an education for you as the actual college.
Right. Absolutely. Such a great point. Well, this has been amazing. But I think, as I told you, nobody gets away from their college-bound kid interview without being on the hot seat.
Okay.
Which I ask you a few questions, which are frankly going to be a surprise to both of us.
Okay.
So my first question is, if you could have lunch with one person, alive or dead, and it could be anyone in the world, who would it be?
Can I give two answers, or is it just
you
one?
You can. I'm very flexible.
Okay, great. So I think that if my sort of close to home answer would be my paternal grandmother, Celia, who passed away when I was knee deep in having young children. And I would have loved to ask her about her life, and particularly what it was like to evacuate from Odessa, where she was living in Ukraine with my 4-month-old dad when World War II started.
Wow.
Because I have been thinking a lot about my next book and trips that I have taken and other people have taken, both in literature and in life. And just that journey to Kirov, where they ended up living during the war, by train during the war, no lines of communication, with a 4-month-old baby, and I'm sure with absolutely zero supplies. I would just love to hear about that in more detail than I thought to ask at the time. And if it's a, just kind of pie in the sky, I would love to have lunch with Mike White, the creator of the White Lotus series, because I am obsessed with both of them, both season 1 and season 2 in particular, because it's got such amazing literary underpinnings. Like, I don't know if he read Henry James, but I would love to ask him, because the whole Americans in Europe being clueless and not understanding the dark history and the subterranean roots. I think we would have to have like a 3-hour lunch, and I would just pelt him with questions.
That sounds fabulous. Yeah, it's sort of a running joke that Mark doesn't know any TV shows or movies. So he's going to be listening to this like, White Lotus?
Who?
What's
what?
that?
Tell him to watch season 2. It's so good.
He gets so many recommendations from our guests, and I don't think he follows them. But maybe this one he will. Okay. So you mentioned journeys. What's on your bucket list in terms of a place you'd love to go that you haven't been able to yet?
I would love to go to Ireland, which is a very literary, again, country, and maybe retrace Leopold Bloom's steps through Dublin. And I've actually discussed Ireland with a friend of mine who fantasizes occasionally about, okay, if we have to flee the U.S., Ireland actually does not make poets pay income tax, and she's a poet.
Seriously?
Yes. And I was like, oh, does that apply to writers? Because I could do that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Let's see. And what is your favorite pig out food, your secret vice?
So probably ice cream, which I try not to keep in the freezer because it will evaporate, but evaporate in my mouth. But there is a place around the corner from us called Rick's Rather Rich Ice Cream, which has this flavor called industrial chocolate. And I could literally just dive into the bucket of it and
that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
What does industrial chocolate entail?
So industrial chocolate entails, if I remember correctly, really dark chocolate with chunks of dark chocolate and a strain of like orange flavor that is really subtle, but just really pulls everything together. And I don't know what they put in it, but apart from the ingredients I just mentioned, but it's really addictive.
That sounds amazing, and I should probably never go there.
If you do, I will take you and we'll get very small scoops.
Well, this has been amazing.
Lisa, it was so fun to talk to you. Thank you.
And where can people find your book? And I just have to give this book a plug. It's so beautifully written. There are literary allegories, references everywhere. Yeah. It's beautiful. So where can they find this amazing book?
They can find it anywhere books are sold, on Amazon.com, bookshop.org, through their local independent bookstore, which you can order if they don't stock it. If you don't want to buy it, you can request your local library to order it. I'm already working on my own publicity. Well, then the library will buy it and many people can read it. So, it's all good, but yeah, it's The Golden Ticket: A Life in College Admissions Essays, available a week from now, or actually, I guess when your listeners are listening, it'll
probably be available then.
Okay,
because we have like a 10-week lead time.
Oh, then yeah.
So it's available now.
Great.
Well, thank you so much,
Lisa. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
On Thursday's episode, Susan's my co-pilot, and we will be looking at an article in the Chronicle for higher ed called The Haves and the Have-Nots of Higher Education. And the subtitle is Higher Ed is Increasingly Becoming Unequal. It's by Robert Kelchin. Our question comes from Ellie from New York, and she wants to know, when is the best time for a student to take a gap year? We'll continue our interview with Akil Bello on tough questions about test scores with part 2 of 4. We'll get the final part of Lisa's College Spotlight on McGill University. Now, friends, you know I've been reading 10 quotes from my book I wrote in 2017 called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. In that book, I take an entire chapter to answer the most frequently questions that I get asked as a college counselor. And I promised you for 10 weeks in a row, I would share with you some of my favorite quotes from that book. And so now I want to share with you our fourth quote. I know we've covered quotes 1, 2, and 3 so far. And today I want to give you the fourth quote. And this is a quote that comes from Lloyd Thacker from the Educational Conservancy. And it has to do with college rankings and the misuse and abuse of college rankings. So here's what Thacker had to say about college rankings. The commercialization of college admissions has created a crisis by undermining educational values. And the commercialization has been led by the ranksters, the rankings. I love this line. The rankings imply a degree of precision and authority that's simply not supported by educational data. Their influence on education in this country has grown way beyond any educational jurisdiction. They have dictated the way education is perceived and pursued. It's Lloyd Thacker, founder of the Educational Conservancy. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.